In the quiet of his dimly lit apartment, Jack Winters sits alone, haunted by memories of a past he can't escape. A retired cop scarred by loss and regret, his only solace comes from his loyal German shepherd Logan. But when Jack buys a cheap, rundown cottage seeking a fresh start, both man and dog soon realize there's something far darker hidden beneath the surface of their new home. As Logan grows increasingly restless, an unsettling mystery begins to unfold. What is lurking in the shadows of this old house, and how far will Jack go to uncover the truth? Watch now to discover the bond of loyalty, courage, and the secrets that only a dog can sense. Jack Winters sat alone in his small, dimly lit apartment, the walls lined with memories he'd rather forget. A retired police officer at the age of 58, Jack's days of chasing criminals and making life-or-death decisions were long behind him. Now his life was filled with the stillness of silence, broken only by the occasional sound of a distant siren or the hum of the refrigerator. His once steady hands trembled slightly as he poured a glass of whiskey, the liquid burning his throat. It was a habit he couldn't shake, not since that night. The night when his partner Mike Donovan was gunned down in a warehouse shooting. The haunting images of Mike's lifeless body, the weight of his last words, had never left Jack. Every night they visited him in the form of nightmares. The nightmares came and went, but the emptiness lingered, a constant reminder of the friend he couldn't save. But the sorrow didn't stop there. Jack's marriage had fallen apart. His relationship with his son Thomas strained beyond repair. A divorce followed by years of isolation had driven a wedge between them that Jack couldn't seem to bridge. He was alone. His only remaining companion, his German shepherd Logan, lay curled up by the door, his eyes always alert, always watching over Jack. One evening, as Jack sat staring at the worn reflection in his bathroom mirror, the thought struck him. He couldn't keep living like this. The empty house, the quiet, the loneliness. It was consuming him. He needed to do something, anything. He needed a change, even if it was only a small one. That was when he saw an ad in the local paper for an abandoned cottage selling for the ridiculous price of $300. The ad promised fixer-upper potential, but Jack didn't care about the details. The price was a steal, and that was enough to catch his attention. $300. Why not? He muttered to himself, wiping the mirror and shaking his head. He didn't have the money for a major renovation, but maybe a new start, no matter how small, would bring some relief. So with little thought but a desperate need to escape, Jack withdrew the last of his savings and bought the place. He didn't tell Thomas. He knew what his son would think. Another impulsive, reckless decision. But what did it matter? His son hadn't spoken to him in years. He was beyond caring about anyone's opinion. The only thing Jack had left was Logan, and the dog was always by his side, offering the kind of loyalty Jack didn't deserve. That night, as Jack lay in bed, he could hear the wind howling outside. The sound was familiar, soothing even, but it also reminded him of his own emptiness. He glanced over at Logan, who was already asleep. His body curled protectively at the foot of the bed. Jack sighed, wishing for the 1,000th time that he could go back to the man he once was. But he knew that man was gone, buried under years of grief and regret. All he could do now was move forward, no matter how small the steps. The next morning, Jack packed his things and set out for the cottage. It wasn't much to look at, old, weathered, and surrounded by overgrown weeds, but it was a place to call his own. For the first time in years, Jack felt a small spark of hope. Maybe this was the fresh start he'd been waiting for. Maybe this little cottage with its peeling paint and broken windows would be the place where he could rebuild his life, or at least forget about the past for a while. Jack unlocked the door and stepped inside, the air musty with the scent of old wood and dust. Logan trotted in after him, nose twitching, his ears pricked up. There was something unsettling about the place, but Jack couldn't quite put his finger on it. He shook off the feeling, reminding himself that this was exactly what he needed, a new beginning away from the memories that haunted him. But as he walked further into the house, he couldn't help but notice Logan's odd behavior. The dog's usually calm demeanor had shifted. His tail was stiff, his eyes focused, staring at something beyond Jack's sight. Jack frowned. "What is it, boy?" he asked, his voice hoarse, barely a whisper. Logan didn't respond, but his gaze remained fixed on the far corner of the room where the light barely reached. Jack's heart skipped a beat. He couldn't explain why, but the feeling that something was wrong settled heavily in his chest. There was no immediate danger. No one else was there. And yet the atmosphere felt thick with unease. Logan's low growl broke the silence, and Jack instinctively reached for the service pistol at his side, though it had been years since he'd used it. The air in the room felt heavy, as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting. With a deep breath, Jack turned toward the window, the only source of light in the dark room. A faint flicker of movement caught his eye, but by the time he reached the window, it was gone. He looked down at Logan, whose body was taut with tension, ready for whatever was to come. Something was off. Jack could feel it in his bones. And deep down, he knew that this place, this cottage, wasn't just an escape. It was something else, something that would pull him into a mystery deeper than he could ever imagine. Jack stood still for a moment, Logan's growls vibrating in the air, his sharp eyes still fixed on the far corner of the room. The house felt like it was watching him, and he couldn't shake the growing sense that something was terribly wrong. The windows, though dirty and cracked, let in a thin sliver of light that barely illuminated the room. Dust motes floated lazily in the air, the silence broken only by the occasional creak of the old wood settling. With a sigh, Jack moved forward, his boots creaking on the wooden floor. The house was in disrepair, sure, but it was more than that. There was a stillness in the air, something ancient and heavy, like it had been abandoned not just by people, but by time itself. "Come on, Logan," Jack muttered, pushing open a door that led to the kitchen. The hinges screamed in protest, making the hair on the back of his neck stand up. Logan trotted ahead, sniffing the air with a sense of urgency, his ears flicking back and forth. The dog seemed to know that this place held more than just dust and cobwebs. Jack surveyed the room, noting the condition of the furniture that still sat in place as though the former owners had just walked away. A chipped ceramic mug sat on the counter, the last remnants of some long-forgotten meal still clinging to its surface. The kitchen cabinets hung open, their insides empty save for a few scattered pieces of broken glass. The floor was littered with crumbs and dirt, evidence of neglect. But it was the scent that made Jack's stomach churn. A mixture of mildew, stale air, and something else, something metallic. As though the house itself had been touched by something darker. Logan's reaction only confirmed it. The dog had stopped sniffing and stood completely still, his body rigid with tension. Jack took another step forward, walking cautiously around the old oak table. The floorboards creaked under his weight, the sound strangely amplified in the otherwise quiet house. He could feel Logan's eyes on him, a constant reminder that he wasn't alone. Not just because the dog was with him, but because there was something else in the air, something unseen. At the far end of the room, a set of narrow stairs led down to the basement, the only place Jack hadn't dared venture yet. He could feel an unsettling pull toward it, as though the house was calling him. Max, or Logan, as Jack now called him, was sniffing more intently near the base of the stairs, his tail stiff and his mouth slightly open, as if he had caught a scent of something foul. Jack's hand tightened on the banister as he approached the stairs, the wood groaning under his grip. With one last glance at Logan, Jack descended slowly, the air growing colder as he made his way down. The dim light from the upper floor barely reached the bottom, leaving the basement in total darkness. As Jack's foot hit the bottom step, a shiver ran down his spine. He had expected the basement to be damp and musty. What he didn't expect was the sheer cold that seemed to emanate from the very walls, as though the temperature had dropped below freezing. It was unsettling. The space was small, but filled with old tools and strange objects, all scattered haphazardly, as if someone had been in the middle of working but had left in a hurry. Logan was at the far side of the basement now, his ears pinned back, and Jack could tell from his stance that something wasn't right. The dog stood still, growling low in his throat, staring at something in the corner of the room. Jack followed Logan's gaze, and his breath caught in his chest. In the dim light, he could make out the faint outline of a small metal box hidden under a pile of rags. His heart raced as he stepped toward it. As he bent down to touch the box, Logan's growl grew louder, more urgent. Jack froze, but before he could react, the box rattled as if it had been disturbed. Something was wrong. The silence was thick now, oppressive, and Jack could feel the weight of the house pressing in on him. The air seemed to hum with an energy that Jack couldn't place. Every instinct he had as a cop screamed that this place wasn't just a forgotten home, it was something far darker. Jack stepped back, heart pounding in his chest. Logan whined, tugging at his owner's sleeve as if to say, "Get out." But Jack, drawn to the mystery, couldn't help but reach for the box. He needed to know what was inside. As Jack's fingers brushed against the cold metal of the box, a chill ran through his entire body. The room seemed to darken despite the faint light still coming from the upper floors. The rattling noise grew louder, like something was trying to break free from within. Logan's growls had turned to frantic whines, now his paws pulling desperately at Jack's sleeve, urging him to move away. But Jack, caught in the grip of an inexplicable curiosity, ignored the warning. He grasped the box, its edges sharp under his fingertips, and pulled it free from the pile of rags. The sound stopped abruptly, as if the box had swallowed the noise, leaving a suffocating silence in its wake. For a moment, Jack just stood there, the box in his hands, Logan at his side, his breath shallow and quick. Suddenly, the air around them felt heavy, as if something ancient and forgotten had just awakened. Jack's heart skipped a beat. He couldn't explain it, but the sensation gnawed at him, a sense of being watched, not by anyone in the room, but by something deeper, something far more unsettling. The sensation took him back to another time, to another place, his days on the force. Days when he'd learned to trust his instincts, when his training had sharpened his senses to the point of almost reading a room, a situation, a person. He remembered the first time he had felt this feeling, the feeling that something wasn't right. It had been years ago, before the shooting, before everything fell apart. Mike Donovan's voice echoed in his mind. "You're feeling it too, aren't you, Jack?" "Something's off. We need to be careful." Jack's chest tightened at the thought of Mike. The memories flooded back, each one sharper than the last. The two of them, partners through thick and thin, working side by side, trusting each other with their lives. Until the night it all shattered. Until the warehouse. Until Mike had fallen beside him, a bullet lodged in his chest, his life slipping away in Jack's arms. That night had taken everything. His badge, his marriage, his son. But the worst part was losing Mike. He was more than just a partner. He was a brother. And that loss, the emptiness left in its wake, had been something Jack could never truly fill. Jack's hand trembled as he held the box. The past, the memories he had tried to bury, rose up inside him like a tidal wave. He couldn't push them away. He was no longer just the ex-cop who had retired in disgrace. He was a man still haunted by the ghosts of his past. Logan's quiet whine snapped Jack back to the present. His dog was still standing at his side, eyes, wide ears pinned back as if something in the house was making him uneasy. Jack looked down at Logan, who seemed to be sensing what Jack himself was now fully aware of, a presence, something in the air that didn't belong. Someone's watching us. The thought was so vivid, it felt almost like a voice, as if it had been spoken aloud. But there was no one else here. The house was empty. Still, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that something in this place was far more than just a haunted house. He pushed the thought aside and slowly knelt down to open the box. The moment the lid lifted, a musty, almost chemical scent wafted up. Old paper mixed with something darker, something unsettling. Inside, he found a collection of old journals, their covers worn and yellowed with age, as well as several maps and notes written in an elegant, meticulous hand. As Jack picked up the first journal, his eyes skimmed the page and his breath caught in his throat. The name at the top of the page was Edward Peterson, the same name from the documents he had seen earlier, the same name that had led him here to this house, to the mystery that was now unfolding. Peterson had written extensively about something, about water, about hidden resources, about a discovery so extraordinary that it had cost him his life. Jack's fingers froze as he read a note at the bottom of one of the pages. "They will stop at nothing to control this. If anything happens to me, I have hidden the truth beneath the floorboards beneath this house. It must be protected at all costs." Jack's heart raced. This is what they were after. This is what Caldwell and his men wanted. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. Peterson hadn't just discovered water. He had discovered something that could change the future of the town and the people who controlled it. But Jack wasn't sure who Peterson had been trying to protect the secret from, and why had someone wanted him dead. Jack's mind spun as he thought of the people who had come before him, the ones who had disappeared into the shadows of this town's past. They had all been drawn here by something in the water, something in the earth. But the most pressing question now was what would happen when Caldwell found out Jack had uncovered this secret. He wasn't sure if he was ready for what was coming, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not when he was this close to the truth. The box, the journals, the secret beneath the house. They were all connected. Jack felt the weight of it all settle heavily on his shoulders. But he wasn't alone. He had Logan, his loyal companion, who had stood by him through thick and thin, and together they were going to figure this out. The air in the basement felt thick, as though it were holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Jack closed the journal with trembling hands and took a deep breath, trying to steady the chaos in his mind. He had found what he was looking for, but at the same time he had stumbled upon something far bigger and far more dangerous than he ever imagined. Peterson's words, "It must be protected at all costs," echoed in his head. What was so important about this discovery? What could someone want so badly that they would kill to keep it a secret? Logan, who had been standing by Jack's side, began to sniff the air again, his nose twitching, his ears alert. The dog seemed even more agitated now, walking in circles and occasionally pawing at the ground. Jack followed Logan's path across the room, his mind still reeling from the journal's revelations. He tried to focus on Logan, who had clearly found something that caught his attention. Suddenly, Logan stopped, his body stiffening, and began scratching at a specific spot on the floor. Jack's heart raced. This wasn't the first time Logan had acted like this, but something about it felt different, urgent, almost as if the dog was trying to tell him something important. "What is it, boy?" Jack murmured, bending down to investigate. Logan didn't respond, but he continued pawing at the floor, his eyes locked on the wooden planks beneath him. With a sinking feeling, Jack realized that Logan had found something. The floor wasn't solid. It was slightly raised in one corner. Jack ran his fingers along the edge, feeling the distinct separation. He grabbed a nearby tool from a pile of old gardening equipment, pried up the boards, and revealed what was hidden beneath. A small rusted metal box lay in the darkness beneath the floor, almost completely buried in dust and dirt. Logan let out a low whine as Jack reached for the box, his fur bristling with anticipation. As Jack picked it up, he felt a heavy weight in his chest, as if this simple action was leading him closer to something he wasn't sure he was ready to face. The box was much smaller than the one Jack had found earlier, but it felt just as important. He examined it carefully before he decided to open it. His fingers shook slightly as he pried the lid open, revealing another set of documents. Maps, letters, and more journals, all carefully stacked and organized inside. Jack quickly sifted through the contents, his eyes catching every word, every map. The maps were of the local area, but with strange markings over certain parts of Millfield. His eyes narrowed when he realized that these markings lined up with the land directly beneath the cottage, as well as areas around the town's water supply. He pulled out a journal that looked similar to the one he had read earlier. This one was more recent, the handwriting more frantic, and the entries were much more urgent. Peterson had written about a discovery, an underground aquifer with the purest water anyone had ever seen. It was hidden under the town directly beneath the cottage. Jack's breath caught. This was the source of the water Caldwell had been after. But Peterson had gone further. According to his notes, Peterson had documented the exceptional purity and mineral content of the water. The discovery had the potential to change everything. It could provide clean water to the entire town indefinitely, or it could become a gold mine for whoever controlled it. Jack's mind raced. This was why Peterson had been killed. Someone had known about this aquifer and they wanted it for themselves. Caldwell had been after this. He had wanted the water rights, but what Jack didn't understand was why Peterson had gone to such lengths to hide this information. Why had he been so determined to protect it? What did Caldwell want to do with this water, and why had Peterson been so fearful for his life? Jack closed the journal and sat back against the wall, the weight of the discovery sinking in. The pieces of the puzzle were slowly coming together, but with each new revelation the danger seemed to grow. He wasn't just dealing with a real estate mogul or a few corrupt officials anymore. This was much bigger. Someone was willing to kill for control of this water, and Jack knew he was getting too close to the truth. Logan whined, pressing his head against Jack's knee as if trying to comfort him. Jack scratched behind the dog's ears, feeling a sense of gratitude for the only friend who had never left his side. They were in this together, and now they had a new mission. Find out who was behind this and stop them before more lives were ruined. Jack sat still, the journal in his hands, feeling heavier than it ever had before. He couldn't shake the feeling that Peterson had known something far more dangerous than just the value of the water beneath Millfield. There was something more sinister at play here. Peterson's handwritten notes, scattered across several journals, painted a clear picture of the scientist's obsession with the aquifer and the lengths he'd gone to protect it. As Jack flipped through the remaining pages of the journal, he found more references to the aquifer and its importance. Peterson had been meticulous in his research, documenting every detail of the water's composition, its purity, and the potential it had to change the town's future. But the most troubling part was the secrecy he'd kept, the warnings he had left behind. "They will stop at nothing to control this," Peterson had written in several places. "If anything happens to me, follow the signs." It was clear that Peterson had feared for his life in the final days before his death. But what could have been so valuable that a man like Peterson, who had devoted his life to research, had felt the need to go into hiding? Jack rubbed his face, the weight of the discovery sinking deeper into his bones. This wasn't just about water rights, this was about power. Caldwell's interest in the aquifer went beyond simple greed. If he could control the water, he would control the town itself. The more Jack read, the more he realized that Peterson had uncovered something much bigger than just a water source. This aquifer was potentially one of the purest, most valuable water systems in the region, a resource that could be worth millions, even billions, in a world where clean water was becoming a scarce commodity. Logan's whine broke through Jack's thoughts, pulling him back to the present. He glanced down at his dog, who was sitting at his side, eyes wide and ears alert. Logan could sense Jack's growing anxiety, but the dog's unease was palpable. He knew something wasn't right, and Jack felt a growing sense of dread gnaw at him. It wasn't just the discovery of the aquifer that was troubling. It was everything that had followed. Peterson's death, the hidden journals, the metal boxes, the strange messages, the pieces of the puzzle were starting to fall into place, but the bigger picture was still shrouded in mystery. Jack closed the journal with a heavy sigh. He had always been a man of action, but now for the first time in a long while he felt unsure of where to go next. He had to keep moving forward no matter the danger. Peterson had hidden the truth for a reason, and Jack was determined to uncover it no matter the cost. But something was stopping him from just running headfirst into the unknown. The nagging feeling in his gut, like someone was watching him, refused to let go. It was as if the house itself had become a part of the mystery, drawing him in deeper. Peterson had known this place held secrets, and Jack was beginning to suspect that those secrets weren't just buried beneath the floorboards. Taking a deep breath, Jack stood up, locking the journals away in a drawer. There was more to this than he had yet discovered. He had to find out who would go to such extreme lengths to keep this secret. Whoever they were dangerous, and Jack knew he had to tread carefully. Logan trotted to the door, looking back at Jack with those familiar, intelligent eyes. Jack felt a surge of determination. "We're not stopping now, buddy," he whispered. "We're going to finish this." With a last glance at the house, Jack locked the door and stepped out into the cold night, Logan by his side. As he walked into the darkness, the house loomed behind him, its mystery still hanging in the air. But Jack couldn't stop now. He had to push forward, and he had to find out what really happened to Edward Peterson. The air was sharp with the bite of winter as Jack and Logan made their way through the quiet streets of Millfield. The town, which had once felt like home to Jack, now seemed like a place he barely recognized. People walked past with their heads down, too busy with their own lives to notice anything unusual, But Jack knew that something dark was lurking beneath the surface. This wasn't just about the aquifer anymore. Caldwell's shadow stretched over the entire town, and Jack was about to find out just how deep the corruption ran. As they passed the old mill, now abandoned and rotting away, Jack caught a glimpse of a familiar face. Robert Caldwell. Jack's blood ran cold. Caldwell was the kind of man who oozed confidence, a man used to getting what he wanted. He was tall, well-dressed, his posture straight, exuding power. But Jack could see through the facade. Caldwell had something to hide, and Jack was starting to suspect it was tied to the water. Everything was tied to the water. Caldwell's eyes flicked to Jack for a moment before he approached, a thin smile stretching across his face. "Winters," he said, his voice smooth but laced with a subtle edge. "I see you found yourself a new home. Quite a bargain, I hear." Jack didn't respond at first. Instead, he took a long look at Caldwell, studying the man who had been pulling the strings behind the scenes. Caldwell's smile never wavered, but Jack noticed the slight twitch in his jaw. There was something unsettling about the man. Jack could sense that Caldwell wasn't just a businessman. He was dangerous. "I've heard a lot about you lately, Jack," Caldwell continued, his voice a little too calm. "Seems like you've been poking around in places you shouldn't be. A man like you should know better than to stir up old ghosts." The way Caldwell spoke, the underlying threat was clear. Jack could feel it in his gut, a cold chill that ran deeper than the winter air. This wasn't a coincidence. Caldwell knew exactly what Jack was after, and he wasn't about to let him keep digging. Jack finally spoke, his voice steady but laced with caution. "I'm just trying to get to the bottom of things, Caldwell. What happened to Peterson, what he was working on? It's important. People deserve to know the truth." Caldwell chuckled, though it lacked warmth. "The truth." He stepped closer, lowering his voice so only Jack could hear. "The truth is messy, Winters. Some things are better left buried. People don't want to hear about things that threaten their way of life." Jack's fingers instinctively brushed the pistol at his side, but he quickly retracted his hand, not wanting to show too much. "So is that what you're trying to protect, the truth? Or is it something else?" Caldwell's eyes hardened. "Be careful what you ask for. You're not the hero here, Jack. You're just another man with a past that's catching up to him." Before Jack could respond, Caldwell's associates appeared from the shadows, their faces familiar but unwelcoming. They didn't say a word, but stood there like silent sentinels, watching Jack with a sharp intensity. "Your new home," Caldwell said, his voice thick with mock sympathy. "It's not the only thing that's been buried here, Jack. You should think long and hard before you dig any deeper. There are forces at play that you won't understand." With that, Caldwell turned and walked away, his men following in tow, leaving Jack standing in the street, the cold wind biting at his skin. Logan's growl broke the silence as he stood by Jack's side, sensing the tension in the air. Jack's mind raced. Caldwell's threat was clear. They weren't just trying to buy him out, they were trying to intimidate him into silence. Caldwell's power was everywhere in Millfield, and he wasn't going to give up easily. Jack's jaw clenched. He was up against more than just a corrupt businessman. Caldwell was part of something bigger, something that reached into the very foundation of the town. The aquifer wasn't just a resource, it was a weapon. And Jack wasn't about to back down now, not after everything Peterson had gone through. Jack turned to Logan, who was still watching the retreating figures. "We've got work to do, boy. Let's get to the bottom of this." The chill of the winter air seemed to follow Jack inside the house as he stepped through the creaking door. Logan was immediately on alert, his body stiff and his eyes fixed on the shadows in the dimly lit room. It wasn't like any other house Jack had been in before. This place, this cottage, had a presence, a weight that made the air feel thick and oppressive. Logan's growls were a low rumble in his chest, growing more insistent the further they ventured into the house. Jack paused and looked down at his dog. Logan's fur was raised along his back, and his eyes darted from one corner to the next. Jack knew better than to ignore his dog's instincts. Logan had always been more than just a pet. He had been a partner, a trusted ally during Jack's days on the force. If Logan was reacting this way, something was wrong. "What is it, boy?" Jack whispered, but Logan didn't respond. Instead, the dog trotted toward the far end of the living room, toward the same corner where Jack had noticed a strange, unexplainable feeling earlier. It felt like the house itself was hiding something. Logan's paws tapped softly against the floor as he paced near a set of dusty wooden shelves, then stopped abruptly. His tail went rigid as he sniffed the air and scratched at the base of the wall. Jack's curiosity piqued, he crouched down beside Logan. The floor beneath the shelves seemed oddly solid, but there was a small, barely noticeable gap in the wood that suggested something had been hidden there, something that had been kept out of sight. Jack's heartbeat quickened as he kneeled down and pried at the floorboards with the edge of a nearby chair leg. The wood creaked, groaned, and then gave way with a satisfying crack. What lay beneath wasn't just old dust or forgotten debris. It was another room. Hidden beneath the floorboards was a narrow space, one that had been deliberately sealed off. The air in the small room smelled musty, but the faint scent of paper and leather reached Jack's nose as he peered inside. Logan sniffed the air, and Jack's heart sank when the dog's body language shifted from alert to protective. Logan moved forward cautiously, his growls deepening as he stepped inside. Jack followed, his mind racing, wondering what else was hidden in this place. The room was small, just enough space for a desk, some bookshelves, and a few scattered papers. It was as if Peterson had used this room as a personal office or study. Everything about it felt frozen in time. Old books, some with cracked spines, lay on the shelves, and a stack of papers rested neatly on the desk, as if left in the middle of a thought. Jack's hand hovered over the stack, but he hesitated. The air was thick in here, and his instincts were screaming at him to be careful. Logan's ears perked up as he sniffed the stack of papers. Jack crouched down, his breath shallow, and reached for the top sheet. As soon as he touched it, Logan barked a sharp warning sound that echoed through the small room. Jack's hand froze. The dog's behavior was too deliberate. Logan wasn't just warning him, he was telling Jack to stay back. Jack's pulse raced as he gingerly lifted the top page and saw that it was a map, Peterson's map. It was a hand-drawn diagram of Millfield and the surrounding area, but there was something more. Lines ran under the town, marking an underground system, the water system, the aquifer Peterson had uncovered. Jack's heart skipped a beat. He didn't know exactly what Peterson had discovered, but this map told him it was more than just a clean water source. It was a blueprint, a map to something hidden under the town. And now Jack was involved in something far bigger than he'd realized. His fingers trembled as he pulled out more papers. Notes, journal entries, all pointing to the aquifer's exceptional purity and value. Peterson's final entries were written with urgency, detailing his attempts to protect the water from those who would seek to control it. But there was more than just water. Peterson had uncovered something far more valuable, something that people were willing to kill for. Logan's low growl broke Jack's reverie. He looked up, and his stomach churned. The door creaked, and Jack could feel the presence of someone. Someone was watching him. His gut tightened as he realized that they were no longer alone. Jack's heart raced as he stuffed the papers back into the box, his mind reeling from what he had just uncovered. The sound of footsteps approaching from behind him snapped him out of his thoughts. He quickly turned around, feeling the hairs on the back of his neck rise. Standing in the doorway was Robert Caldwell, his tall frame framed against the dim light of the hallway. His cold eyes met Jack's, and for a brief moment Jack could feel the weight of Caldwell's presence. A predator confident in his power and determined to protect whatever secrets he was hiding. Caldwell's mouth curled into a tight smile, but there was no warmth behind it. "Looks like you found something interesting," Caldwell said, his voice smooth, almost too calm. "But I have to ask Jack, what exactly are you hoping to achieve here, this little house, this secret?" Jack stood up, keeping his eyes locked on Caldwell. The man was a force to be reckoned with, too smooth, too composed for someone with so much to lose. But Jack wasn't intimidated, not anymore. Not after everything he had seen, everything he had learned. "I'm not interested in your offers, Caldwell," Jack replied firmly, his voice steady despite the tension in the room. "I want the truth, and I'm going to find it no matter what." Caldwell chuckled, taking a step forward, his polished shoes clicking on the hardwood floor. The truth, he echoed, a mocking tone lacing his words. You think you're the first to want to know the truth, Jack? People like you always think they can make a difference, but you're interfering with things that are far beyond your understanding. Jack clenched his fists, the words interfering, and things beyond your understanding ringing in his ears. He wasn't some bystander. He wasn't going to let Caldwell control this town and its people any longer. Not when he knew that the lives of everyone in Millfield were on the line. You're not just after the house, are you? Jack asked, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. It's the water, the aquifer. Peterson was protecting something, and now you want it for yourself. Caldwell's eyes narrowed and the smile on his face faltered for just a moment, but it was enough for Jack to see the flicker of something dark beneath the surface. Caldwell straightened, his expression hardening. Yes, Caldwell said coldly, it's about the water, and you, Jack, are standing in the way of something that could save this town. You're threatening my business, my livelihood. You're not just poking around in places you don't belong. You're about to lose everything for your little crusade. Jack felt the weight of Caldwell's words, but they didn't shake him. He had already lost everything once, his badge, his family, his partner. This time, he wasn't backing down. I'm not selling Caldwell, Jack said, his voice sharp, unwavering. You can't buy the truth, and you can't intimidate me into silence. Whatever Peterson found down here, I'm going to expose it. If you think you can scare me into giving up, you're wrong. Caldwell's smile returned, but this time it was colder, more dangerous. You'll regret this, Jack. People like me don't just let things go. You'll soon realize just how far I'm willing to go to protect my interests. You have no idea what you're up against. Before Jack could respond, Caldwell turned on his heel and walked out, his associates following closely behind. The door clicked shut behind them, leaving Jack standing alone in the cold room. He took a deep breath, and his chest tight with anger and determination. This wasn't just a fight for the house anymore. It was a fight for the future of Millfield, and Jack wasn't going to back down. Logan, who had been watching silently from the corner, padded over to Jack's side, his eyes soft and understanding. Jack scratched the dog's head, his thoughts racing. He had no idea what Caldwell's next move would be, but Jack knew one thing for sure: it was only going to get worse from here. The winter wind had begun to pick up its icy fingers, pressing through the cracks of the old cottage as Jack stepped back into the living room, Logan at his side. The encounter with Caldwell still buzzed in his head, a low hum of menace that refused to fade. Jack had a sinking feeling that the man's words were more than just empty threats. Caldwell's power in Millfield was far-reaching, and Jack knew he was about to get caught in something deeper than he could have imagined. But Jack couldn't afford to back down now. He had too much at stake. The discovery of Peterson's hidden water system had only deepened the mystery, and Caldwell was determined to silence anyone who dared to expose the truth. He needed to find more answers, and he needed help. Someone who knew what Peterson had been dealing with. That's when he remembered the woman. Eleanor Crawford. She had been living next to Peterson's property for years, and she was the last person who might still remember what had happened before Peterson died. Jack had heard her name mentioned in passing by some of the locals, but no one ever really spoke about her. Eleanor was known for being reclusive, living alone, in a house that seemed as ancient as the town itself. But Jack knew she had information that could change everything. It didn't take long to find her. Eleanor's house was tucked away at the edge of town, almost hidden behind a cluster of overgrown trees. The house was small and weathered, much like the rest of the town, but there was something about it that made it feel like it had always been there, standing quietly through the years, bearing witness to the secrets of Millfield. Jack knocked on the door, his heart pounding as he waited for a response. Logan, ever watchful, stood beside him, ears perked. When the door finally creaked open, Jack was met by an elderly woman with sharp eyes that seemed to see right through him. "You must be Jack Winters," Eleanor said, her voice raspy but strong. "I've been expecting you." Jack blinked in surprise. "You've been expecting me?" he asked, his curiosity piqued. Eleanor nodded, her gaze fixed on Logan for a moment before she looked back at Jack. "You're the only one left who's asking the right questions. I've been waiting for someone who would find the truth, and now here you are." Jack stepped inside, feeling the weight of her words settle heavily in the air. The inside of her home was dimly lit, the smell of old books and wood smoke thick in the air. Eleanor led him to a small, cluttered sitting room where they both took a seat, Logan lying at Jack's feet. "I knew Edward Peterson well." Eleanor began, her voice softening as she spoke. "He was a good man, a brilliant scientist, but he had enemies. People who would stop at nothing to control what he found." Jack leaned forward, his interest piqued. "What did he find?" Eleanor's eyes grew distant for a moment, as though she was recalling painful memories. "Edward discovered something beneath this town, something far more valuable than anyone could have imagined. An underground aquifer that could change the future of Millfield. But Caldwell and his people, they didn't want to hear about it. They wanted to control it." Jack's pulse quickened. "So Peterson refused to sell the water rights to Caldwell?" "Yes," Eleanor confirmed. "He wouldn't give in. They offered him a small fortune, but he knew what they would do with that water. It wasn't just about money, it was about power. And when Edward refused, the threats started. They came for him, trying to force him into submission, but he wouldn't bend." Eleanor paused, her expression turning grim. "One night they came to his house. Men with no faces, with no names. They threatened him, told him if he didn't cooperate, they would make him disappear. They weren't the first to try, and they wouldn't be the last." Jack's mind raced. The pieces were falling into place. Caldwell's men had been trying to intimidate Peterson into giving up his discovery, and now they were doing the same to Jack. But Peterson had never backed down, and neither would Jack. "They killed him, didn't they?" Jack asked, his voice tight with anger. Eleanor nodded solemnly. "Yes, they killed him to keep the secret. But before he died, he hid the truth, beneath the floorboards in this town. It's there waiting to be uncovered. But Jack," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper, "there are people watching. People who won't stop until the truth is buried forever." Jack sat back, the weight of her words pressing down on him. He knew what he had to do. He couldn't stop now. Not when he was so close. "Thank you, Eleanor," he said, his voice low with resolve. "I'll find it. I'll uncover the truth." Eleanor reached over and placed a hand on his arm. "Be careful, Jack. They'll come after you just like they came after Edward. You're not just dealing with a corrupt businessman. You're dealing with a network, a system that's been in place for a long time." Jack nodded, his mind already racing with the next steps. He had no intention of backing down now. The truth had to come to light. As Jack left Eleanor's house, the gravity of the situation settled deeper into his bones. The sun had set, casting long shadows across Millfield, the streets eerily quiet. Jack had a long night ahead, and the weight of Peterson's discovery hung heavily on him. He had to find the truth, but now more than ever, Jack could feel the dangers closing in. Logan trotted beside him, his movements calm but deliberate. There was a quiet urgency in the dog's steps, as if Logan knew something Jack didn't. The bond between them had always been strong, but tonight there was something more. Something Jack couldn't explain. The dog had always been his companion, but now it felt as though Logan was leading him, guiding him through the uncertainty of the night. As they approached the cottage, Jack's senses were on high alert. The house loomed ahead, its dilapidated frame casting an ominous silhouette against the dimming sky. The cold air seemed to have thickened, pressing in around them. Logan, too, was alert, his ears twitching at every rustling sound, his eyes scanning the surroundings. The dog had grown even more protective in recent days, and tonight it was as though Logan knew they were getting closer to something hidden within the walls of the house. Jack opened the door, the familiar creak echoing in the quiet. The interior was still the same. Dust, silence, and the ever-present smell of mildew. But Logan was behaving differently. The dog was no longer walking beside Jack. He was ahead, of his movements quick and precise. Logan's eyes locked on a spot in the living room where the shadows seemed to move unnaturally. The dog's low growl vibrated in the stillness, a clear sign that something was amiss. "Easy, boy," Jack murmured, but Logan didn't calm down. The dog's stance was firm, every muscle in his body taut. He was guarding something in the house. Logan moved toward the corner of the room where the floorboards creaked with age. He sniffed the air and then began scratching at the floor, his tail rigid. Jack watched his pulse quickening. He had seen Logan act like this before, back when they worked together as partners in the force. Logan had always been able to sense danger before anyone else. "Good boy," Jack said, softly kneeling beside the dog. He pulled up a few loose boards and peered into the space beneath. His breath caught when he saw a faint outline of something hidden there. A metal box. His heart raced as Logan growled again, standing protectively by his side. Jack didn't hesitate. He reached for the box, feeling its cold surface as he lifted it free. Logan's ears were pinned back, his body language tense as he watched Jack closely. It was as though the dog was guiding him, urging him to uncover the truth. Jack opened the box slowly, revealing more of Peterson's journals, maps, and documents that Jack had been searching for. The pages were filled with more detailed notes from Peterson, revealing the intricate system beneath the town, the aquifer, its potential, and the threat it posed to those who sought to control it. The more Jack read, the more he understood the weight of Peterson's work. The scientist had uncovered a resource that could change everything for Millfield, and Caldwell's interest in the aquifer wasn't just about profit, it was about power. But there was more to it. Peterson had written about threats, veiled warnings, and direct confrontations with those who wanted to take control. He had recorded their visits, the threats they made, and the steps they had taken to force Peterson into submission. Caldwell's name appeared repeatedly in the journals, the man's influence spreading like a shadow over Peterson's work. It was clear now. Caldwell had been behind the pressure, the intimidation, and Peterson had paid the ultimate price for refusing to give in. Logan's growl broke Jack's concentration. He looked up to see the dog standing at attention, eyes fixed on the door, his body tense. Jack followed Logan's gaze, his instincts kicking in. Someone was here. Someone had been watching. Jack grabbed the journals and stuffed them back into the box. He didn't know who had followed him into the house, but he was certain they weren't here to help. Logan's reaction confirmed it. The dog was more than just a companion now. He was a protector, guarding Jack against the unseen threat that was closing in. With the box in hand, Jack made his way to the door. Logan led the way, his body a protective barrier between Jack and whatever danger lurked outside. The tension was palpable, the house no longer just a place of discovery, it had become a battleground. And Jack knew that he was about to face something far darker than he had imagined. Jack's grip on the box tightened as he made his way to the door, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew there was no turning back now. He had uncovered too much, and Caldwell wouldn't let him walk away. With Logan leading the way, Jack's mind raced. The evidence in his hands, Peterson's journals, contained the undeniable truth. Caldwell wasn't just a businessman trying to make a profit. He was a criminal, and his machinations were far more dangerous than Jack had anticipated. As they reached the door, Jack stopped, his thoughts swirling. He had the proof. The journals were full of Caldwell's threats and intimidation tactics, all meticulously recorded by Peterson. Jack had expected some pressure, but the extent of Caldwell's actions was far worse than he could have imagined. The documents detailed not only threats to Peterson's life, but also shady deals, under-the-table transactions, and a web of corruption that had been building for years. There was one entry in particular that caught Jack's attention. Peterson had written about a meeting with Caldwell where the businessman had made it clear that he would stop at nothing to control the aquifer. "We'll make you an offer you can't refuse." Caldwell had said a line that sent a chill down Jack's spine. The rest of the entry was filled with Peterson's fear. He knew Caldwell's people would use violence if necessary. And Peterson had been right. Logan's growl snapped Jack out of his thoughts. He looked down at the dog, whose gaze was fixed on the door. The hairs on the back of Jack's neck stood up. Someone was outside. His heart raced as he rushed to the window and peeked out. In the shadows, he saw two figures standing just beyond the fence, watching the house. Jack stepped back, the box of evidence clutched tightly in his hands. He needed to get out of there, fast. "Logan," he whispered, his voice steady, "we're not alone." The dog's ears perked up, and he let out a low growl as if to say, "I know." With his back to the door, Jack scanned the room looking for an escape route. His mind raced. He couldn't risk being caught with the journals. Caldwell had already proven he would go to any lengths to protect his secrets, and Jack knew that if he was caught now, everything would be lost. Logan seemed to sense the urgency, his posture shifting from alert to ready. Jack took a deep breath and moved quickly, stepping toward the back of the house. He was going to have to leave. It was too dangerous to stay. But Jack wasn't going to let Caldwell win, not when he was so close to exposing everything. As they slipped out the back door, Jack looked around, his senses heightened. The darkness of the night closed in around them, but Jack could hear the faint sound of footsteps on the gravel. They were being followed. Logan's growls grew louder, and Jack's hand instinctively went to his gun. He wasn't going to go down without a fight. Caldwell had made his move, but Jack wasn't ready to give up just yet. He had something Caldwell wanted, something that could bring the man down for good. Jack's heart pounded as the shadows of the night closed in around him. Logan's growls were deep and urgent, his body tense as he paced at Jack's side. The footsteps behind them grew closer, the sound unmistakable. Someone was following them. The darkness seemed to swallow every step they took, but Jack's instincts were razor sharp. He was being hunted, and he knew that Caldwell wasn't going to stop until he got what he wanted. The journal, the aquifer. It all boiled down to power, and Caldwell would do anything to maintain it. As they reached the edge of the property, Jack made a decision. He couldn't risk taking the journals with him. He had to leave them behind, hidden just in case. If he was caught now, everything would be lost. He had no idea how long he had before Caldwell's men caught up with him, but he wasn't going to let this end without a fight. Logan's ears were perked, and his eyes were scanning the surroundings, his growls growing more urgent. Jack felt the tension in the air. Something was wrong. It was too quiet. There should have been more noise, more movement, but instead there was a suffocating stillness. Suddenly the silence was shattered by a crackling voice over the radio in Jack's pocket. It was a simple message, but it sent a chill down his spine. Winters. The voice on the other end said, cold and controlled. You're getting too close. You need to stop now, or things will get worse for you and your dog. The voice was unmistakable. It was Caldwell's. Jack's grip tightened on the radio, his fingers trembling with anger. Caldwell knew where he was, and now the threat was real. This was no longer just a corporate fight over resources. Caldwell was playing a dangerous game, and Jack was right in the center of it. We're not stopping, Jack muttered under his breath, more to himself than to Logan. He had to protect the aquifer, protect the truth. But just as the words left his mouth, a terrifying realization hit him. Logan wasn't with him. Logan Jack's voice echoed in the cold night air as he spun around, panic rising in his chest. The dog had been at his side only seconds ago, but now he was gone. His heart skipped a beat as the world around him seemed to slow. The sound of a car engine starting in the distance was the only indication that something was wrong. Jack's worst fear had come to life. Caldwell's men had gotten to Logan. They had taken him. Jack's legs moved instinctively, his body moving faster than his mind could process. He couldn't waste time. He had no idea where they had taken Logan, but he knew one thing for sure: if he didn't act quickly, he might never see his loyal companion again. His mind raced with thoughts of how to find Logan, how to make sure the dog was safe, and how to stop Caldwell's men from getting away with the one thing that mattered: control over the town's water supply. Every step felt heavier as he moved, but he couldn't afford to stop now. Jack had made it this far, and he wasn't going to back down. Not when everything was at stake. Jack's mind was a whirlwind of panic and determination. The sound of the engine fading into the night echoed in his ears as his heart pounded fiercely. Logan, his loyal companion, his friend, was gone. Caldwell's men had taken him, and Jack knew they wouldn't stop until they had what they wanted. Jack wasn't just racing against time to save his dog. He was racing to protect the one thing that could destroy Caldwell's plans: the aquifer. His fingers gripped the radio tighter as he tried to steady his breath. Every step felt like it was taking him further away from his goal. He had to find Logan, and he had to do it fast. The man who had already taken everything from Jack, his career, his family, and, was now going after the one thing Jack still had left Logan. His eyes darted around the dark, snow-covered streets of Millfield. The quiet of the town felt unnatural, the only sound now the crunch of his boots against the ice. He couldn't wait any longer. The cold didn't bother him. All his focus was on getting Logan back. Caldwell had taken his dog, and Jack wasn't going to let that go unanswered. Jack's mind raced as he retraced his steps in his head, trying to predict where Caldwell's men would take Logan. The familiar feeling of being hunted was back, but this time it wasn't him they were after, it was Logan. And that made all the difference. After what felt like an eternity of running, Jack stumbled upon a small, isolated warehouse at the outskirts of town. The lights were dim, and a solitary car was parked in the lot. Jack's instincts flared. This was it. This was where they were keeping Logan. He could feel it in his gut, that familiar, tight feeling that something important was happening here. Taking a deep breath, Jack crouched behind a stack of crates, his hand resting on the old service pistol at his side. His mind was sharp, his senses heightened. He didn't know what to expect inside, but he was ready for whatever came his way. He peered around the corner and saw two men standing guard in front of the warehouse. They were talking in low voices, unaware of Jack's presence. The sound of Logan's barking echoed faintly from inside, making Jack's blood run cold. He could hear the familiar sound of his dog, still alive, still fighting. But for how much longer? Jack moved swiftly, staying low to the ground, his heart pounding in his chest. The guards remained distracted, and he managed to slip past them, his mind racing. He was so close to getting Logan back. Inside the warehouse, the sound of Logan's growls and barks grew louder. Jack's pulse quickened as he crept toward the back of the building. He could see a small group of men huddled around Logan, who was tied to a post, struggling against the ropes that bound him. The sight of his dog, vulnerable and trapped, filled Jack with a surge of anger. Jack's fingers tightened around the grip of his gun as he prepared for the confrontation. He had no plan, no backup, just pure instinct. He wasn't going to let Caldwell win. Not this time. Let him go. Jack shouted, his voice booming in the cold, empty space. The men turned in surprise, their hands instinctively reaching for their weapons. But before they could react, Logan broke free, launching himself toward the nearest man with a ferocity Jack hadn't seen in years. His dog's loyalty and determination were unwavering, even after everything he had been through. The battle was chaotic, Jack's heart racing as he fought alongside Logan. The dog was unstoppable, using every bit of his training and strength to protect Jack. Despite being injured, Logan fought like a warrior, taking down one man after another. Jack fired his weapon, taking out the last of Caldwell's men, but his focus never left Logan. Finally, as the last of the attackers fell, Jack ran to Logan, his heart swelling with relief and pride. The dog's fur was matted with blood, but he was still standing, still loyal. Jack kneeled beside him, feeling a rush of emotion as Logan rested his head against Jack's knee, his body trembling from the battle. "It's over, buddy," Jack whispered, his voice thick with gratitude. "You did it. We did it." But even as Jack spoke, he knew this wasn't the end. Caldwell's men were down, but the fight was far from over. There were bigger forces at play, some forces that wanted to control Millfield's future. And Jack was just beginning to understand how deep the corruption ran. Jack's breath came in ragged gasps as he looked around the abandoned quarry, his mind still reeling from the fight he had just fought. The scent of gunpowder hung heavy in the air, and the distant echo of his own heartbeat drowned out everything else. The battle had been swift, but brutal. Caldwell's men were relentless, their sole purpose to stop Jack from uncovering the truth. But now they were defeated, scattered across the ground. Logan, though injured, stood tall beside Jack, his eyes scanning the dark, his muscles tense. Jack could feel the loyalty radiating from his dog, the bond between them stronger than ever. Logan had been with him through the worst of times, and now he was protecting him once again. Jack's chest swelled with gratitude. The dog had fought with the heart of a warrior despite his wounds. But even as the last of Caldwell's men fell, Jack knew the danger wasn't over. The fight they had just won was only a small part of a much bigger battle. The quarry with its dark, looming walls and rusted machinery was more than just a battleground. It was a symbol of Caldwell's empire, the last piece of the puzzle Jack had to uncover. The moonlight cast long shadows over the crumbling walls, creating an eerie atmosphere. Jack didn't trust it. He couldn't afford to. Caldwell wouldn't stop until he had control of everything. Jack had taken down his men, but Caldwell's reach was vast, and he was still out there watching, waiting for the right moment to strike again. Suddenly, a low, menacing sound broke the silence, a growl deep and threatening. Logan's fur bristled as he stepped forward, positioning himself between Jack and the entrance of the quarry. The dog's eyes were fixed on something in the distance, his posture rigid and protective. Jack's hand instinctively went to the gun at his side. He wasn't sure what was coming, but he could feel the tension in the air, thick and oppressive. The growl grew louder, and Jack's pulse quickened. Whatever was out there, it wasn't just Caldwell's men, it was something more dangerous, more elusive. "Stay close, Logan," Jack muttered under his breath, his eyes darting across the darkness. Logan's growl was now joined by a snarl, a warning that whatever approached wasn't friendly. Then from the shadows, figures emerged. More of Caldwell's men. But these weren't ordinary thugs. They moved with precision, their bodies lithe and quick like predators hunting in the dark. They came at Jack and Logan from all sides, weapons drawn, eyes cold with intent. This was no longer just a fight for survival. It was a fight for everything Jack had left. Logan lunged first, his body moving with deadly grace. Even with his injury, he fought with the same ferocity Jack had come to expect from him. The dog's growls filled the night air as he tackled the first man to come too close. Jack followed suit, firing his weapon at the oncoming attackers, his movements sharp and focused. The battle that followed was a blur. Shouts, gunfire, the sharp crack of fists meeting flesh. Logan fought alongside Jack, his loyalty unwavering, his strength a testament to their bond. Jack knew he couldn't keep up this pace forever. Every second he spent fighting was another second Caldwell had to regroup to plan his next move. Through the chaos, Jack saw Logan take down another attacker, his body moving with the ease of years of training. But the dog's movements were slowing, his limp more pronounced as the battle wore on. Still, Logan didn't falter. He kept fighting, protecting Jack no matter the cost. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the last of the attackers fell, and the quarry fell silent. Jack stood panting, his chest heaving as he scanned the area. His hands were covered in sweat, and his heart was still racing, but the fight was over, for now. He turned to Logan, who was standing by his side, panting but still alert, his body battered but resolute. Jack's eyes softened as he approached the dog, placing a hand gently on his head. "You did good, boy," Jack whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Logan's tail thumped weakly, his eyes filled with pride. But Jack knew this wasn't over. The danger still lurked in the shadows, and Caldwell was still out there pulling the strings. Jack looked out into the darkness, his mind already racing with plans. He couldn't stop now. Not when the stakes were this high. He had to protect Logan, protect Millfield, and uncover the truth about the aquifer. But as he looked down at his loyal companion, Jack felt a surge of determination. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The air felt thick, heavier than it ever had before as Jack and Logan stood in the aftermath of the battle. The quarry, once a silent witness to Caldwell's dark plans, now felt like a lifeless arena where Jack had faced his demons, both external and internal. The echoes of the fight still hung in the air, but the most pressing realization for Jack was that this battle, no matter how fierce, was only part of the war. He wasn't just fighting for the aquifer or for Logan's safety. He was fighting for his own redemption. Jack looked down at Logan, whose chest rose and fell with labored breaths. The dog's limp was more noticeable now, his wounds a stark reminder of the price of loyalty. Jack had always known Logan was more than just a companion. He was his partner, his protector, the only one who had stood by him when everything else had crumbled. But tonight Jack had seen something more in Logan's eyes, an unwavering commitment to not just survive, but to protect, to fight for what was right no matter the cost. As Jack sat on a nearby rock, Logan curled up beside him, the dog's head resting against Jack's leg. They both needed rest, but the weight of the moment was undeniable. Jack felt the burden of everything he had lost. The badge, his family, his peace of mind. But something had changed in him. The fight for Millfield's water was no longer just about uncovering Caldwell's corruption. It was about reclaiming himself, about finding a purpose in a world that had long felt empty. "You've always had my back, Logan," Jack murmured, scratching behind the dog's ears. "I think I'm starting to figure things out. It's not just about stopping Caldwell. It's about stopping myself from running away from the truth, from everything I've lost." For the first time in a long time, Jack felt the fog that had clouded his mind begin to lift. The guilt over Mike's death, the failure with his son, those things had always haunted him, gnawing at him in his darkest moments. But Logan had never stopped believing in him, and through that belief, Jack began to find a sliver of his own strength again. It wasn't about being the man he had been. It was about being a better man now for the people he cared about, and for the dog who had stood by him. The sound of distant footsteps reached Jack's ears, and his heart jumped. It was the familiar sound of danger closing in, but this time it was different. He wasn't running anymore. He was ready. He wasn't just protecting the town's water or fighting against Caldwell. He was fighting for his own soul, for redemption, for a chance to start over, to fix what he could. "We'll finish this, Logan. Together." Jack said, his voice steady, stronger than it had been in years. Logan's ears perked up, his tail giving a slow wag in response. The bond between them had always been unspoken, but tonight Jack realized just how much Logan had taught him about loyalty, resilience, and love. The journey ahead wasn't just about survival, it was about making things right. Jack stood up, his body sore from the fight, but his resolve was unshakable. The quarry might have been where the battle was fought, but it was not the end. He had a plan. The endgame was Caldwell, and Jack was ready for the final confrontation. With Logan by his side, he knew they could face whatever came next. "Let's go," Jack said, pulling Logan to his feet. "We've got one more fight." The cold wind sliced through the trees as Jack and Logan moved swiftly through the darkened streets, heading toward the heart of the battle, the place where everything had begun. The tension in the air was palpable, the quiet almost suffocating, as if the entire town of Millfield was holding its breath, waiting for the final act. Jack's mind was sharp, now focused. The past was no longer something that could haunt him. The guilt over Mike's death, the failed relationship with his son, those demons that had been weighing on him, they all faded into the background. Now all that mattered was the truth. All that mattered was ending Caldwell's reign of control over Millfield and stopping him from poisoning the town's future. But more than that, Jack had something to prove to himself, to Logan, to the memory of Mike. It was time to finish this once and for all. As they approached the old factory at the edge of town, Jack could see the lights of Caldwell's men, their shadows flickering through the windows. This was where Caldwell had set up his operation, where his plans had been put into motion. It was the epicenter of the corruption, the final place to settle the score. Jack's hand gripped the gun at his side as Logan's growl rumbled low in his throat. The dog was alert, sensing the imminent danger, but there was something else in Logan's eyes, a calm determination, as though he too knew this was the moment. This was the moment when everything would either fall apart or come together. "Stay close, boy," Jack whispered, his voice barely audible in the chill of the night. Logan gave a soft whine, his ears perked up, but he stayed by Jack's side, his loyalty unwavering. They approached the factory, staying in the shadows, moving with stealth. Jack could hear the muffled sounds of voices from inside. He could feel the pulse of the town beneath his feet. Millfield was a place on the brink of change, and tonight would decide its fate. Jack's breath hitched as they reached the door. He could already feel the weight of Caldwell's presence like an oppressive force pushing down on him. There was no more running, no more hiding. This was it. He had come this far, and he was not going to back down now. Taking a deep breath, Jack kicked the door open, the sound of splintering wood echoing through the space. The factory's interior was vast and dimly lit, shadows stretching across the floor like ghosts of the past. Caldwell's men stood in formation, their guns trained on Jack and Logan the moment they entered. "Did you really think you could stop me, Winters?" Caldwell's voice rang out from the shadows. He stepped forward, his face smirking, his eyes gleaming with the same cold arrogance Jack had seen before. "You've been a thorn in my side for far too long, but tonight it ends." Jack's hand never wavered on his weapon. "Not tonight, Caldwell. Not when I'm finally going to expose everything you've done to this town." Caldwell's face hardened. He had never expected Jack to come this far to fight this hard, but Caldwell was used to having the upper hand. He had power, influence, money, and he wasn't going to let go of it easily. "You think you can just waltz in here and change everything?" Caldwell sneered. "The town will be mine. The water, the land, everything. You're nothing but a washed-up cop with a dog and a vendetta." Jack didn't flinch. His eyes locked onto Caldwell's, unblinking. "I'm not just a cop, and I'm not alone." Logan's growl cut through the air like a blade, the dog's body tense and ready. Jack knew Logan had been by his side through thick and thin, and now more than ever that bond was their greatest weapon. With a sudden coordinated movement, Jack and Logan lunged at the first of Caldwell's men. Logan moved faster than Jack had ever seen, his teeth sinking into the man's arm, forcing him to drop his weapon. Jack took advantage, disarming the other man and knocking him to the ground. The fight was fast and furious, the factory echoing with the sound of gunfire and the clash of bodies. In the chaos, Jack's focus never wavered. He moved with precision, taking down one man after another, his mind on the prize. Caldwell was still out there watching, waiting for his chance to make his move. But Jack wasn't going to let him get away. Not again. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the last of Caldwell's men were on the ground, defeated. Jack stood breathing heavily, sweat mingling with the blood from the battle. Logan stood beside him, panting but unscathed, his loyalty and strength shining through the chaos. Caldwell stepped forward, his face a mask of rage and disbelief. "You think this is over," he spat. "You don't know who you're dealing with. This is bigger than you, bigger than your dog, bigger than your pathetic little town." But Jack wasn't listening anymore. He had already won. The truth had been exposed, and Caldwell's empire, his control over Millfield, was crumbling. "You're done," Jack said, his voice firm. "You're going to face everything you've done." The air in the factory was still thick with the remnants of the battle. The bodies of Caldwell's men lay scattered across the floor, their weapons useless at their sides. Jack stood tall, but the weight of what had just happened pressed heavily on him. The battle was won, but there was no time to rest. Caldwell's smoldering rage was still palpable even in his defeat, and Jack knew that the real fight was far from over. With Logan by his side, the bond between them as unbreakable as ever, Jack felt a sense of resolve harden within him. The truth had been uncovered, and it was time to bring the whole story to light. Caldwell had been manipulating Millfield for years, using his wealth and influence to control the town's most precious resource, its water. Now it was Jack's turn to make sure Caldwell's reign of terror came to an end. Jack pulled out the evidence he'd gathered, the journals, the maps, the recorded threats from Caldwell's own men, and called Eleanor. She had been his ally from the beginning, and now, more than ever, he needed her expertise to make sure the truth was delivered. She had known Peterson, and she had understood the risks better than anyone. Her help would make all the difference. Within hours, Jack was at Eleanor's house, his mind swirling with everything that had just transpired. Caldwell's empire was built on lies and manipulation, and now the truth had a chance to break it all apart. Eleanor's eyes were filled with determination as she looked through the documents Jack had brought. "This is it," she said, her voice steady. "The evidence. Caldwell won't be able to talk his way out of this." The two of them worked quickly, assembling a dossier of irrefutable proof. Caldwell's dealings with shady business partners, the illegal water rights agreements, and the threats against Peterson that led to his death. It was everything Jack needed to make sure Caldwell couldn't escape. With the documents ready, Jack made his way to the town hall. The people of Millfield needed to know the truth. For years they had lived under the shadow of Caldwell's influence, unknowingly complicit in his greed. Now they had to see who he truly was, and they had to understand just how close they had come to losing everything. Inside the town hall, Jack stood before a group of concerned citizens, including Sheriff Miller, the mayor, and several local business owners. The room fell silent as Jack laid out the evidence piece by piece. He explained how Caldwell had used the aquifer to control the town's future and how he had manipulated everyone in his path to get what he wanted. The room was filled with gasps and murmurs as the truth came to light. Caldwell isn't just a businessman, Jack said, his voice firm. He's a criminal, and he's been hiding in plain sight using this town and its people for his own gain, but not anymore. The realization hit the townspeople like a shockwave. They had been duped, used by someone they trusted, and now they had to reckon with the consequences. But as Jack looked around the room, he saw something he hadn't expected, a sense of relief. People were beginning to understand the truth, and they were starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel. Within days, Caldwell was arrested. His empire built on manipulation and deceit began to crumble. The truth had been revealed, and the community of Millfield could finally breathe again. The town of Millfield began its long-awaited transformation, and with it, Jack found himself in a place he never thought he would be, at the heart of a new beginning. Caldwell's arrest had shattered his grip on the town, but it was only the first step in the healing process. Now Millfield had to rebuild not just its infrastructure, but its soul. And for the first time in years, Jack felt like he could be part of that rebuilding. The water, the aquifer that had been at the center of the town's crisis, was safe. With Caldwell out of the picture, the town could now move forward with securing the water supply, ensuring that it would remain protected for future generations. The once tainted resource was now a symbol of Millfield's resilience, a testament to the strength of the community that had fought to protect it. Jack stood by the newly established water treatment facility, watching as workers and engineers made sure the purification systems were running smoothly. It was a humbling sight. This was the future of Millfield, a future Jack had played a part in securing, even though it had cost him so much. But there was more to the town's rebirth than just the water. The people of Millfield were beginning to come together, putting aside the years of manipulation and fear that had divided them. The local businesses, once on the brink of collapse under Caldwell's control, were now thriving again. The town felt alive with possibility, its streets buzzing with new energy and hope. Jack felt that same energy pulsing through him too. He had come to Millfield seeking redemption, and in many ways he had found it. He had uncovered the truth, brought justice to a corrupt man, and helped secure a future for the people he once protected. But there was something else, something more personal. Jack's mind turned to his past, the years of loss, the mistakes, the broken relationships. He had spent so long running from his past, burying the pain in bottles and forgotten moments. But now, standing in the midst of Millfield's revival, Jack realized that this was his second chance. The chance to fix what had been broken, to mend the wounds that had festered for so long. The town wasn't the only thing that needed healing. Logan, who had been by his side through it all, stood beside him now, his eyes soft but alert. The bond between them had always been special, but after everything they had been through together, it felt unbreakable. Logan had taught Jack more than anyone else had: loyalty, courage, the power of standing firm in the face of adversity. Jack scratched Logan behind the ears, his voice low and full of gratitude. "We did it, boy. We saved this town. And we saved each other." As the sun set over Millfield, casting a golden light over the town that had been reborn, Jack felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Hope for the future. Hope for the people he had once sworn to protect, and hope for himself. He wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. But for the first time in years, he felt like he had a purpose again. The warm glow of the late afternoon sun filtered through the window, casting long shadows across the kitchen table where Jack sat quietly stirring his coffee. For the first time in years, he felt a deep sense of peace, as if the storm that had raged inside him was finally beginning to settle. The town of Millfield had found its way back, and so in a way had he. But now it was time for the most personal part of the healing process, reconnecting with the people he had lost. The phone rang, snapping Jack from his thoughts. He reached for it, seeing the name Thomas on the screen. His heart gave a little lurch, but this time the feeling wasn't dread. It was hope. The past few weeks had seen them start to rebuild their relationship piece by piece. The conversations were still tentative, the old wounds still fresh, but for the first time in years, Thomas had reached out. It felt like a small step towards something bigger. "Hey, Dad." Thomas's voice came through steady but a little hesitant. "Hey, son." Jack replied, his voice thick with emotion. "How's it going?" "It's good," Thomas answered, his tone lighter than it had been in the past. "I've been thinking a lot about what we talked about. I think it's time. I'm coming over this weekend. I want to bring Lucy. It's time we all sat down together. You, me, her, and Max." The mention of Lucy made Jack's heart swell. He hadn't seen his granddaughter in person, yet just pictures, and while the distance had kept them apart, the thought of finally meeting her made him feel something he hadn't in years: excitement. "I'll be ready," Jack said, his voice full of warmth. "I'm looking forward to it." As Jack hung up, he glanced over at Logan, who was sitting quietly by the door, his eyes soft and wise. The dog had been through everything with Jack: his highs, his lows, his mistakes, and his victories. Logan had stayed by his side without question, and now, with the prospect of his family coming together, Jack could feel a sense of peace begin to settle into his heart. The weekend arrived, and with it the reunion. Jack stood at the door, anticipation building as he waited for Thomas, Karen, and Lucy to arrive. Logan was at his side, tail wagging, clearly excited to meet his new family member. When the car pulled into the driveway, Jack's heart skipped a beat. His son, looking older, more settled, stepped out of the car, followed by Karen, his daughter-in-law, who smiled warmly at Jack. But the moment Jack had been waiting for came when Thomas helped a small, wide-eyed girl out of the back seat. Lucy, his granddaughter. She was smaller than Jack had imagined, with the same curious eyes as Thomas had when he was her age. The moment she saw Logan, her face lit up. "Grandpa Max," she squealed, running toward the dog, who greeted her with gentle affection, his tail wagging wildly. "Looks like you've got a new friend," Jack said, his voice thick with emotion. Lucy giggled and hugged Logan around the neck, burying her face in his fur. Jack watched them, feeling his heart swell. This was the family he had missed. This was the life he had hoped for, even when it had seemed so far out of reach. The day passed in a blur of laughter, stories, and shared memories. The house, once filled with silence and sorrow, was now warm with the sounds of family. Thomas and Jack spent time talking not about the past mistakes, but about the future, about rebuilding their relationship, about finding common ground, and about the new chapter in both of their lives. Karen was kind and patient, and Lucy's innocent joy brought a sense of lightness to the room. Logan, content as always, lay beside them, a constant reminder of the loyalty and love that had seen Jack through his darkest times. As the evening wore on and the last of the plates were cleared from the table, Jack found himself sitting back in his chair, a sense of gratitude washing over him. He had his family back. He had Logan, who had never given up on him. And he had a town that was starting to heal just as he was. For the first time in a long while, Jack didn't feel the weight of regret. He had a second chance to make things right, to rebuild what had been broken. And as he looked around at the people who mattered most to him, he realized that sometimes the simplest decisions, the ones that seemed like the most impulsive, could lead to the most profound changes in life. The warmth of the evening lingered long after Thomas, Karen, and Lucy had left. The house, once quiet and empty, now felt full again, full of the sounds of life, the laughter of family, and the steady rhythm of hope slowly rebuilding itself. Jack stood at the window looking out over Millfield, the town that had come back to life in more ways than one. Logan was stretched out by the door, his head resting on his paws, eyes closed but ears twitching at every sound. The dog who had been his constant companion through the darkest days was finally able to rest. Jack knew that Logan, too, had earned his peace. They had both carried the weight of the past for far too long, but now in this moment of quiet, they could finally let it go. Jack's gaze shifted to the fireplace, where the embers of the fire still glowed faintly, casting soft shadows on the walls. The house was different now, more than just a place to live. It had become a symbol of everything he had fought for: redemption, family, and the second chance he had so desperately needed. For the first time in a long time, Jack felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Turning away from the window, Jack made his way over to the small desk where the journals and evidence he had uncovered were neatly stacked. He hadn't forgotten what he had learned, and he hadn't forgotten the reason behind it all. The aquifer, the battle against Caldwell, the town's future. But now it all seemed like a distant memory, a chapter in a much larger story. The real work wasn't just about uncovering corruption or protecting water rights. It was about building a future. It was about reconnecting with his son, finding joy in his granddaughter, and creating a life with Logan by his side. The fight had been hard, but it had brought him something more valuable than just victory. It had brought him healing. Jack sat down at the desk, opening the first of Peterson's journals once again. The ink on the pages was faded, but the words were still clear, still a reminder of the journey they had all been through. Peterson had written about the purity of the water, about its potential to change the town. But Jack now understood something deeper. This was about more than just water. It was about the future of the people in Millfield, about giving them a chance to start over just like Jack had done. He glanced over at Logan, who had lifted his head to look at him, sensing Jack's thoughts. Jack smiled softly and scratched the dog behind the ears. "We made it, buddy," he murmured. "We did it." For a moment, everything was still. Jack felt the weight of the past lift off his shoulders, replaced by a sense of peace that he hadn't known in years. He had fought for so long against forces both outside and within. But now, with his family rebuilding with Logan at his side, he knew that the real battle was over. It was time to move forward. Jack stood and walked to the door, stepping outside into the cool night air. The stars were bright above Millfield, and the town, though still scarred, was slowly healing. He could see the lights from houses glowing in the distance, signs of a community coming back to life. Jack's eyes lingered on the familiar landscape, the same landscape that had once felt like a prison, but now felt like home. He took a deep breath and closed his eyes for a moment, letting the fresh air fill his lungs. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, Jack felt ready to face it. He had a second chance. A chance to fix the mistakes of the past, to rebuild what had been broken, and to live a life he could be proud of. It wasn't going to be easy, but Jack knew he wasn't alone anymore. With Logan by his side, his family slowly mending, and a town that was finding its way again, Jack felt hope. Real hope. And for the first time in a long time, he smiled, knowing that everything, every decision, every step had led him here to this moment. As Jack stood at the threshold of a new life, surrounded by the people in the town he had fought to protect, he realized something profound. The journey he had been on was not just about uncovering secrets or defeating a corrupt man. It was about rediscovering the things that truly matter: loyalty, love, and the healing power of second chances. And through it all, Logan, his faithful German shepherd, had been by his side, embodying these very values. Logan, with his unwavering loyalty and courage, had shown Jack the true meaning of companionship. In the darkest moments, when everything seemed lost, it was Logan's presence that reminded him to keep going. The bond between a person and their dog is one that transcends words, a connection rooted in trust, protection, and love. It's a reminder that even in a world full of chaos, there are always those who will stand by us no matter the cost. The story of Jack and Logan is a testament to the power of love and loyalty, values that are often found in the most unexpected places. It is a reminder that no matter how far we've fallen or how difficult our journey may seem, there is always the potential for redemption and healing. And sometimes the key to finding our way back is as simple as the unconditional love of a dog. In the end, it wasn't just the water that Jack was fighting for. It was the future, a future where love, loyalty, and family could thrive once again. Through the bond with his German shepherd, Jack found the strength to heal, to protect, and to rebuild not just his own life, but the life of his town.